Okay. So I'm Lois Penny. I'm the president of the West Harlem Progressive Democratic Club. And I'd like to thank everyone for participating. Sean Farrell is going to be the moderator for this forum, and I'm going to turn over control of the meeting to him.
Thank you, Lois. Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate you all being here. This is a very important forum, so I thank you again. I am the co-chair of the platform committee of the West Harlem Progressive Democratic Club. I will be your moderator this afternoon. Today's format for the forum is as follows. Each candidate will be given about 10 minutes to speak. As your moderator, I will keep time. We ask that each candidate prepare a brief opening of no more than 3 minutes, allowing about 7 minutes from Q&A from me. After the 10 minutes is up, we will go on to the next candidate. Once we have finished with all candidates, we will open up the floor again, this time to the audience to ask questions of any candidate. I will be sure to give each candidate time when they have about 5 minutes left, and then again when they have about 2 minutes left. The order for today's forum was picked at random. We're going to start with former Manhattan Community Board 7 Chair Elizabeth Caputo, followed by President of Community Education Council 3, Kimberly Watkins, then Councilman Mark Levine, followed by Representative Lindsey Bullen, then Councilman Ben Kellos, and then Senator Brad Hoylman. Ms. Caputo, the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes.
Great, thanks so much. It's great to see you, Lois and Sean, and the leadership and members of the West Harlem Progressive Democrats. I feel like we're neighbors because we are continuously joined. I chaired Community Board 7, and a lot of the issues that we dealt with on the community board were also issues that affected our neighbors to the north just by a few blocks. So it's really an honor to have a chance to try to earn your support and talk a little bit more about my race and the race for borough president. So who am I? My name is Elizabeth Caputo. I have called New York my home my entire adult life. And I'm running for this office because I bring sort of the responsible executive leadership that's needed for our neighborhoods and for the city. I've lived and worked in Manhattan throughout its toughest days, through 9/11, through the 2008 financial crisis, Hurricane Sandy, and now what we're all facing, the global pandemic, where New York has really been at the epicenter. I have brought commitment and energy to local government at every step in my career, and I'm a problem solver at heart who looks forward to talking to you a little bit more deeply about some of the issues in the neighborhood. My career has been 25 years of living and working with Manhattan, always being the constant. I have an extensive background in municipal finance, where I supported local infrastructure projects for the city and around the country. And as mentioned, I was the longest serving community board chair for Manhattan Community Board 7. So I feel very qualified and ready to lead. Why am I running? It's a lot of the issues that I think your club really cares about: economic justice, climate, criminal justice, women's issues, public education, bringing our arts and culture and our small business back. We need strong, innovative leadership to address these issues. And my belief is that our current city leadership has failed us, whether it's dealing with the pandemic, our schools closing and opening, restaurants and economic development, social, racial, and gender inequality. With the immense challenges that we're facing today and the fiscal crisis that's going to require years, if not decades, to recover from, we need to elect leaders who can represent all of us and who can do a great job for the city. And I want to be that person for you. I build bridges. I've done it throughout my career. And I know I'm very proud that a lot of the work I've done through the grassroots civic organization I ran for a decade, DL21C, was where we brought thousands of Manhattanites into the political process and located and educated and activated a lot of people in West Harlem and elsewhere. So I'm going to bring a sense of community, inclusivity, and equity to the heart of everything I do. I really look forward to talking to you a little bit more today. I'll just add 2 points. I think it's great that the 3 women are on the call, and we're notoriously underrepresented in politics, especially in the city. So I hope that, all things being equal, our fight for equality in offices down the ballot will reflect the great diversity of female and minority candidates in our fight for equal representation. So I also believe very strongly in my work. I work as a day job, in my day job at the World Economic Forum, where we work to engage leaders around the world to bring cities fresh new ideas. And I want to bridge that, be a bridge between the international and the local as well, as your borough president. So with that in mind, I am happy to answer any questions and talk a little bit more. Again, we're at a crossroads, and I know we're feeling it everywhere from Inwood to Battery Park City and everywhere in between, and believe that our best days are ahead. And I want to be your champion for the city and the borough we love.
Thank you, Ms. Caputo. One of the questions that I have for you deals with childcare. In the current midst of this pandemic, we're seeing a childcare crisis where a lot of people are having to go to work and having no one to take care of their children. COVID-19 has demonstrated that the patchwork of childcare providers and after-school programs is simply not enough to support New York City's working families. As borough president, how would you propose to strengthen and fund childcare for working families across New York City?
Sure, it's a great question. Something I believe in very strongly. My mom was a working mom, living and working here in Manhattan. She was a public school teacher. So I know firsthand how hard it was for her to support a family and work here. I believe very strongly in the work that the borough president's office can do by really using the bully pulpit. And I think to start off first is what I said in my opening statement, that I think having I'm sorry?
You have 5 minutes, sorry.
Oh, 5 minutes to answer that question, or 5 minutes left?
5 minutes left.
Okay, thanks. I believe very strongly in having the ability to build substantial relationships with women and with working families. Working families are core to our city, and we need to start with where and how they work. We need to make sure that we provide rent relief for families. We need to make sure that we provide the right types of training for women who don't have the luxury of working from home. One of my big pillars of this campaign is related to transit. And I think that women who are running and working here need to make sure they have safe and equitable ways to get to and from work. And oh, sorry, did I? And again, it's something I would certainly prioritize, knowing that it really starts with, parents in the West, especially with the West Harlem Dems. I know there are children in the neighborhood who have not had the chance to be prepared for adulthood because of unfunded public schools. I am a big believer in the public school system. I think we need to strengthen that first and foremost.
Which leads me to a secondary question, shifting gears slightly here to education. How would you strengthen that, and specifically strengthen parental involvement mechanisms such as community education councils?
Sure, and I know we have an expert community education council leader who's going to be speaking, I think, just after me. And I have been a friend of Kim's for a long time, followed her work, and agree with a lot of what she is doing for the city and for the neighborhood. I think CECs need to reflect the diversity of our neighborhoods. We need to make sure that we are giving them adequate funding. And in the same way that I ran community boards, where the borough president did a monthly borough board meeting, I would like to have CECs actually meet monthly, if not more, with the borough president, just to make sure that those leaders have a seat at the table with city government and that their voices are heard.
Thank you very much. And with the remaining time, we have about 2 minutes left. Fellow candidates such as Councilman Kettles and Senator Hoylman have both gone on the record refusing campaign contributions from real estate developers, lobbyists, and corporate donors. This past September, when asked about voluntary restrictions on fundraising, in particular, if you would reject real estate donations, you responded, "I'm not prepared to answer that question right now." My question to you, Ms. Caputo, is are you prepared to answer that question now, and what is your answer?
Sure, I am prepared to answer that question. I'm going to be talking to everyone. And in order to build this city back, we need to be speaking with people in NYCHA. We need to be speaking with people in middle-class housing, and we need to be speaking with part of the economic development that has helped rebuild and built this city. That's industry. And no person is going to have, I think I mentioned in that forum that I'm going to be unbossed and unbought. but I will speak to everyone. I have not accepted significant dollars from the real estate community, but I am not having a purity test like some of my opponents are. I believe very strongly that to build this city back, we need to include them, hold them accountable, make sure they advance the progressive needs that we care about as New Yorkers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For those of us that recently joined, Councilman Levine is here as well as Senator Hoylman. Thank you very much for joining us today. Just to quickly recap in terms of today's forum, each candidate will be given 10 minutes. We ask that you both prepare a 3-minute opening with about 7 minutes of questions and answers from me. After the 10 minutes is up, we will move on to the next candidate. Once each candidate has had an opportunity to speak, we will then open the floor to any questions from the audience. Now that we've finished with Ms. Caputo, we're going to move on to President of Community Education Council number 3, Ms. Watkins. Ms. Watkins, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sean. And hello, Elizabeth, Lindsay, Brad, and Mark. And thank you so much, Lois, and everyone from the West Harlem Democrats for hosting us today. It's an honor to be here and talk to you. My name is Kim Watkins. Kimberly is the name that my mom calls me when I got into trouble, so Kim is fine. Let me start by just telling you a little bit about me, what you need to know about me. I am a public school mother. I live in Harlem, and my daughter attends middle school in the 6th grade Zoom school. So I'm balancing a lot of interesting parts of life right now. I'm a marathon coach for the New York Roadrunners, and I own a small business in fitness. I am president of CEC3, which is the Community Education Council. And thank you, Elizabeth, for your compliments. I have been working with the CEC since my daughter went to kindergarten and was largely brought to the public school governance and the local government because of injustices that I observed within the first couple of days of my daughter attending kindergarten on the Upper West Side. She went to a school called PS 191 and which ended up being the centerpiece of something called the Upper West Side rezoning, which was an incredibly large multi-year engagement process that was spearheaded by myself and my colleagues on CEC3. And one of the reasons that got me into this race is the lens through which I saw how the local government operates as a function of public schools. When we went through this process and we got to a plan, you know, the engagement was really contentious and divisive, as many issues are, most issues are when it comes to your own children and our own neighborhoods. But we get to the end of the road, we get to the plan, and various stakeholders with a lot of power started whispering in the ear of the mayor. And next thing you know, the deal's pulled off the table. It really only led to the success of that rezoning was only because there was some shame in the media, and we were able to convince the mayor to put the deal back on the table. But that experience, many other similar experiences with the public school system that I've experienced over the last 6 years, belie the same fundamental concerns that I have about the way that we operate our government. I'm in this race to create a next generation local government, largely because the next generation of New Yorkers are going to inherit systems and structures that support injustices that many regular New Yorkers feel across all of our issues. And of course, my expertise is within the public school system, but whether you're talking about public schools, affordable housing, our rigged economy, the climate, public health, we are supporting privilege, creating and supporting the prevention of a break in bubbles for people rather than lifting the rest of us up. So we need a champion for essential workers, a champion for the voices of our most vulnerable, for people that work hard day in and day out, are strapped day in and day out, and just need a fighting chance. I'm really excited to take your questions. I don't know that I was able to sort of get through all 52 questions on the questionnaire you sent, but I'm excited to converse with you, Sean. So shoot.
Thank you, Ms. Watkins. Just a moment ago, you touched on issues being divisive. One such divisive topic here in the city is the NYPD's use of certain technology, specifically patentizer and facial recognition technology, what has led to over policing in certain communities, especially minority communities, and false arrests. If you're elected borough president, what reforms will you push for the NYPD that will help establish trust between the police and the communities they do police, as well as making sure there's oversight and accountability of the NYPD?
Great question. And it is, you're right, it's a really divisive issue. As I said before, I live in Harlem. Before I moved to Harlem, I lived on the Upper West Side, and I was an auxiliary police officer in the 2-4 precinct. So I've seen this issue from both perspectives. And also as a public school parent involved in the school system, the getting police officers out of our school system is something that's really, really important to me. It's something that I think we were teased with a little bit this year, and it's incredibly frustrating to see that school safety agents are not truly working through the DOE, that we're not in making sure that our schools have counselors and mental health supports rather than the focus on the NYPD in our school system. The answer to your question is a really complicated one, because you're right that policing is overseen and managed in different ways depending on where they are. Some of the things that I think that we really need to be talking about are making sure that some of our police officers are more are closer to home in terms of where they live. I think the percentage of officers who live close to where they serve should be higher. I think also that our base rate of pay is really low in New York City relative to the type of work that we do. I also believe, as I know most of my colleagues here do, that our police officers should not be the first responders to many of the incidents that take place on the street. So by the same token, I live in a neighborhood where I am seeing and experiencing a rise in crime. So we have a lot of work to do in this area, and I'm excited to get to work on day one on that.
Thank you. One of the other things that you touched upon just moments ago was talking about essential workers. You have gone on record saying we must create affordable home rental and ownership stock for people who perform essential jobs, such as teachers, nurses, first responders, and infrastructure workers. How do we do that?
Well, I mean, we have the ability to put buckets of apartments aside for community board members and developments that go through. Why are we not able to set aside buckets and create lotteries for our teachers, for the women and men that serve in positions in our hospitals, for librarians, for school nurses, I think for firefighters? I think there's an opportunity to explore different ways that we can create space for affordable housing, prioritize for affordable housing for the workers who really need to be close to where they work. Elizabeth rightly is focused in some part on the transit system. We have a lot of work to do on that. But one of the things that I think is really frustrating is that, just to take school nurses, for an example, something that I've worked on a great deal in CEC3 and across the city, because we've had a school nurse shortage for 10 years or more, and it has gone left completely undealt with by our city government currently. For 10 years, this has been going on, where we are losing nurses that are employed full-time by the government. And what we're doing as a Band-Aid to that is hiring private companies and bringing contracted nurses on. But the reason that we're losing nurses is because they're not being paid a living wage, and so they live far away from where they serve. So why can't we create an opportunity to make sure that we have homes for the people that are working in our communities? I think we can.
Thank you. And with the remaining 2 minutes that you have left, I want to talk within the same breath about housing. You've also said that local leaders must advocate for policies that force developers to abide by the rules. What is your assessment of the city's current land use approval process, and what policies should be enacted?
Wow, that's a tough question. And I think where I would start is with the concept that the distinction, as I understand it, between the rezoning and the ULURP process, and then the development itself, and then the legal sort of the legal exercises that almost always shadow these steps, is that everything is kind of twisted and turned around. Our community, the need for affordable housing and for development should start with the need itself, what it is we need to build. Obviously, there are the process that we go through in terms of ULURP. I think I remember current borough president Gail Brewer saying that she had been through 159 ULURPs over 7 years, which seems an exhaustive and really energy sort of sucking exercise that her and her team go through when all of these applications come in for exceptions to what the rezonings are. So why don't we have an actual plan for our borough and across the city, in fact, actually, to ensure that we have created the systems and structures for the development that needs to take place. So I think that's the main thing that I would say.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Now we turn to Councilman Levine. The floor is yours. You have 10 minutes as well.
Well, thank you so much, Sean, and hello, West Harlem Progressive Democrats. This is such a storied Democratic club, and now coming back stronger than ever, thanks to so much young talent here in the club. It's really been inspiring. I'm just full of admiration for so many of your leading members. Joyce, for your work on ACS reform, Sean and Darren for your work on judicial reform, Barry for your outstanding work leading CB9. And I've had the pleasure to partner with many of you over the years. April in our fight for HDFCs, defending them from relentless policy attacks, working with Barry and others to hold Columbia accountable for their myriad broken promises at the McDonald's site. And I'm proud of what we've been able to deliver in the community. Investments in Manhattan Borough houses, where we've been able to secure hundreds of thousands of dollars in funding for security cameras and funding for the senior program. Millions of dollars in support for local youth programs like Brotherhood Sister Soul, Boys and Girls Club of Harlem, Grand Wyndham at the Manhattanville Community Center. Help for over 1,000 local residents to pursue citizenship for free with lawyers out of my district office on 141st. We've done many street co-namings for important local leaders who have passed, like former CB9 stalwart Pat Jones. And I'm excited to be working with Judy Eason on a street co-naming in honor of her late mother, Jenny. And we've given out thousands of portions of healthy, fresh food during this pandemic and for years prior out of the mobile food pantry we run out of my district office. The next one's on Thursday this week, so let us know if you or someone you know needs help. I'm proud of the historic victories we've won citywide for tenants. I passed landmark legislation making New York City the first place in America to establish right to counsel for tenants facing eviction in housing court. Of course, as chair of the City Council Health Committee, I've been fighting this pandemic with every ounce of my strength. And I'm proud that we opened a center back in May for rapid COVID testing and antibody testing at 21 Old Broadway, which I'm now working to make sure will be one of the first sites for community vaccination. And I'm excited that we're working on a major package of legislation to reform the broken system our city uses to collect and process DNA in criminal cases, especially for young people. And of course, Sean at Legal Aid, you all have been great partners in that effort. Finally, a word about myself. I started my career as a teacher, a bilingual math and science teacher in the South Bronx, junior high school 149. I founded Neighborhood Trust Federal Credit Union here uptown, which has given thousands of families in the neighborhood access to micro loans, to do everything from buy their first home computer to start a small business. And of course, I live with my family on 163rd Street, my wife and our two sons, both public school students, one in high school at Columbia Secondary on 122nd, and one a student at City College. I'm running for borough president now to take this work to the next level. And I am just thrilled that potentially, for the first time in 20 years, we have the possibility of electing a borough president from here uptown. And it would mean the world to me to have the support of West Harlem Progressive Democrats in this campaign. Thank you, and back to you, Sean.
Thank you, Councilman. Let's start with healthcare. You are the chair of the council's health committee, which thrusted you into the spotlight this year. We've seen the numbers, and they show that the virus has affected people of color disproportionately compared to that of white people in the city. We also notice how this neighborhood, or neighborhoods like West Harlem, were among the last to get testing facilities. What do you attribute that discrepancy to? And as borough president, what would you do to address the issue?
Well, this pandemic has revealed and exacerbated enormous racial inequality in healthcare, in housing, because of course the virus transmits more readily in crowded apartments, in employment, because of course it's essential workers who have been out there taking risks for us who have gotten sick at disproportionate rates. And yes, in testing, there has been consistently disproportionately high testing in whiter, wealthier neighborhoods throughout this pandemic. It's unacceptable. That's why I fought to bring one of the largest testing facilities to 21 Old Broadway here in our neighborhood, which does not only diagnostic but antibody testing. As I mentioned, we're working to make that an early site for vaccination. And actually, I think I can break some news, exciting news here today, that we are expecting to be able to open a pop-up testing site in my district office on 141st Street very soon. We'll get back to you when it's official, but we're working hard to close the equity gaps here uptown in communities of color around the city and beyond.
Now I want to shift gears. You have about 5 minutes left. Back to education here. Given your background in education, you were probably well aware of the uneven PTA funding across the city and the unequal distribution of resources across the city, especially as it compares to public schools. If elected as borough president, how would you address this inequality of resources and uneven PTA fundraising?
And thank you, Sean. Yes, I started my career as a public school teacher and proud union member, and teaching bilingual math and science in the South Bronx. Also, I've been a public school parent for, I guess, the last 15 years or so, and also a member of the education committee. So it's an issue that's extremely important to me. And there's enormous inequality in the resources which PTAs are able to raise. There are some PTAs in the city which are raising over $1 million a year, and some which are raising, frankly, close to zero. And that just exacerbates inequality. And so I'm drafting legislation that would help fix that by ensuring that there's some resource sharing so that better funded PTAs have to share some of what they raise with schools in low-income neighborhoods as a way to close that equity gap.
Thank you. And lastly, I'm going to turn back to healthcare. Given your role in the health committee, I want to ask you whether you view mental health as a health issue or a criminal issue. And what I mean by that specifically, the responses that we have typically to mental health issues, we call police. Do you think that that should be addressed as a health issue, or do you think that police responding to cases of mental health crises is the appropriate response?
Absolutely, Sean. The response to mental health crisis and overdose crisis should not be a police first approach. We should send a team out that would include a social worker, perhaps an EMT if appropriate, and a peer who can work as a counselor and support in such cases. Mental health should be treated no different from general health problems. If you are suffering from a mental health crisis, that's no different than if you're suffering from cancer or a broken leg. And our medical insurance system should treat it comparably, and our public response system should reflect that, not treating it as a criminal problem, but treating it a problem that needs medical attention, social work attention, and others. And that will prevent what's just been a horrifyingly large number of cases in which mental health response has escalated to violence, in a heartbreaking number of cases, fatally so. We can avoid that by responding with compassion, with medical attention, with peers, with social workers, and I'm a strong proponent of that. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you. You have about 2 minutes left, so I'm going to ask you one more question.
Yes.
I'm going to turn now to housing.
Yes.
When it comes to housing, what are the issues you're most concerned with, and what is your vision as borough president to tackle these issues?
Well, I mean, there's just so much that we couldn't do in only 2 minutes. We have a severe crisis in affordable housing in this neighborhood, in this borough, in this city, and that is doubly true in this pandemic. We have to do even more to keep tenants in their homes. That's why I'm working to expand right to counsel and housing court. We have additional legislation coming on that front. We have to ramp up our construction of affordable housing. One of the reasons why we need to secure a millionaire's tax in Albany so we can fund truly 100% affordable housing. We have to do more to support affordable home ownership, including in this neighborhood, which is home to one of the largest concentrations of HDFCs. And I've been proud to fight with all of my strength in support of HDFCs that have come under attack again and again and again from City Hall. We have to fix the broken ANCP program, which saddles buildings with unacceptable debt, really making it impossible for them to succeed as co-ops. And I'm also really proud to have prevented well over a dozen foreclosures on low-income co-ops, HDFCs, right here in West Harlem by either securing additional funding or getting relief from oppressive enforcement by HPD. So we need a multi-front approach here, prioritizing affordable rental housing and home ownership, making sure it's accessible to people at the lowest income levels, the lowest AMIs, and ensuring that every neighborhood in the city, no matter whether wealthy, middle class, or low income, has a fair portion of affordable housing, something we have not lived up to for many years.
Thank you, Councilman. I'm going to turn now to Representative Boylan. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. And it's wonderful to be here. I appreciate your time and organizing today. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And I've heard the conversation thus far, and it should be fun to dig in with your questions, Sean. I'm excited to see what you got for me. My name is Lindsay Boylan. I'm an urban planner. I've been a lifelong public servant alongside becoming a mom and wife in New York City. I started my career the first decade in urban planning, managing public spaces as varied as Bryant Park, parts of Chelsea, Meatpacking, Harold and Greeley Squares, and the pedestrianized plazas of Broadway. After going to business school at Columbia, which we can talk about in terms of their work or lack thereof in really being responsive to the community, we'll get to that in the Q&A. I went into municipal finance because I wanted to not just understand how you manage public spaces for people, but how you fund them and how you fund the infrastructure that is built across our country. After that, I went and worked for the state of New York, ultimately for the governor of New York as Secretary for Economic Development, overseeing all of job creation, as well as housing for the state of New York. And one thing that I saw in the very early stages was the Civil Rights Museum, which was funded both by HCR and ESD relatively recently, which is something that I was very excited about. It's a small indicator, but a really important marker of the work we have to do moving forward in our community as a whole in terms of education and showing a real education about our history, frankly. You're probably wondering how I got here today. From being a young woman who came to New York after college with $100 in my pocket. I had 9 apartments in 10 years. I did the whole loop-de-loop around the island of Manhattan. I call myself a shore walker as a result. That was a lot of fun. I think I had, the only thing that stayed with me through all those apartments was my bicycle. I never had a couch, but I had a bike, which I got with my first tax return, which was wonderful. And I've made my way, and New York is my home, will always be my home. And I did run for Congress. You may have been familiar with my race, and you're probably thinking, is this someone who just wants to run for office? Is she like any other elected official who wants their next job because they're term limited? And I say no. I found myself this summer after I didn't win the congressional race, walking around our city, walking around our borough. And what I saw was shuttered stores, sanitation that was not well maintained, people fearful of their communities, people having a lot of concerns about how things have been handled and no one to really talk to. And I thought, gee, this is what I've spent my whole career doing. My whole life and my initial interest in going into urban planning was about how to make cities work better for their people. Initially, when I was a senior in college, Hurricane Katrina happened in New Orleans. And this whole question about how could you rebuild in a more equitable way cities to work for their people was the most fundamentally important thing I learned. And so that's what I came to New York wanting to do, especially in the spring of my senior year when Jane Jacobs passed away and I read her obituary. And I bugged the urban planner quoted in it until he gave me my first job just to have me stop bugging him. So urban planning and how we make cities work better for people is in my DNA. It's my passion. That is what this job is all about. under good times and under difficult times, which is where we find ourselves. This job is critical for the way forward for the city, especially for this borough, but really for the whole city. And I mean, Manhattan Borough President is a critical role for the future of this city, regardless of how much money we're going to get from the federal government, regardless of what battles are going to happen between the mayor and my former boss, the governor. We are going to need an advocate who spends every moment of their day saying, how can I help my borough recover? How can I focus on what the people in my community need, whether we're talking about more equitable, more sustainable, more livable city? And how do I use all the tools in the toolbox that the borough president has, from capital funds to staff to case management to land use review to zoning review, all of these things? How am I going to use this toolbox to help our community not only recover, but recover in a more equitable, sustainable, and livable way? And that's what I'm going to do. That's what I did as a problem solver at the state level, overseeing tens of thousands of state workers and hundreds of millions of dollars in budget line items. That's the work I did getting the budget passed on behalf of job creation in Albany as well. That is what I'm going to do in this job. And I'm going to break down silos. You're never going to come to me and have me say that's not my responsibility, because my view as a public servant is always that it's my responsibility. And that's frankly why I'm running. And I'm very excited to speak with you, Sean, and for you to give me some zinger of some questions that I know are coming, given the ones I've heard already.
Thank you very much. You have about 5 minutes left. One of the things you hinted on is exactly apropos. It is a critical time that we're currently facing in.
Yes.
One thing that you have previously discussed that you would do if you were president is to get money into people's pockets. And one way you would do that is by increasing unemployment benefits immediately from 50% to 100%. How would this be done?
Well, that I've talked about that beginning in my congressional race. So when I was going to be a legislator in DC and have some influence on the stimulus checks, and I don't think $1,200 or $600, whatever the latest contemplation, is enough. We need $2,000 a month, at least, for people to be tied over. And how it does relate to my current work and work as your future borough president is in the following. A lot of the problems that we face are not just systemic, but they're operational. So one of the things I heard the most in the spring of this year wasn't the problems with the stimulus check, because people got them, it helped to tide them over. It was in accessing unemployment benefits. I know people who it took a month to get access to it because they're an independent contractor. They had to get the right forms. They work for 3 companies. They had to wait on the phone literally for 3 weeks. And if you missed the case manager, you were kind of in a bind. That's why I think the stimulus is all the more important, because there are all these ways in which we miss a huge number of people. We lose time, and people are suffering wholly right now. In terms of how I could continue to promote stimulus checks now, I'm doing as much as I can. I'm calling DC. I'm advocating right now to have 2 senators in Georgia on the Democratic side who can get that passed, and other stimulus that's going to be necessary in the new year. But in terms of getting funds in this role in people's hands, the fight for my role as borough president is going to be much more about how federal aid, which will be forthcoming, gets spent in this borough, which is the central business district for the whole city. So I'm going to be in the front of line, figuring out every trick of the trade that I learned when working for the state, working for the governor, saying, you're going to listen to me and you're going to focus on how we have as much money as possible coming into the borough of Manhattan, not just because it's where I'll be the borough president, but because it's our central business district. It's in many ways the cultural heart of the city, and it's the central artery for recovery. So there are limitations to what I can do in this particular job to get stimulus checks in people's hands, aside from advocacy. But then when we do get federal aid, I will be very much focused on making sure Manhattan gets its really gargantuan share of the pie in every way possible.
Thank you. With about 2 minutes left, I'm going to circle back and kind of transition here. You did say there are some limitations of what you can do as borough president. But one thing that's very vital to the role of being borough president is that you have influence over land use decisions and the process for decision making in Manhattan and competing concerns that may arise in the process. How would you rank various land use priorities and how as you make these decisions?
Well, given the fact that if we're just talking about zoning, for instance, as a meta conversation around land use, for instance, 9 out of the 10 last contemplated rezonings or upzonings have taken place in low-income communities, primarily of people of color, and that's just totally unequitable. I can pretty much guarantee you in all of those cases, there's one or two landowners, real estate interests who have an outsized piece of the pie in terms of potential benefits from the project. I don't think we're that far off when we think about Columbia University as a whole, for instance, in the near neighborhood. We need to completely transform how both land use processes work, ULURP, as well as zoning, and build it around the important goals we have. And to get back to your question about what is most important, affordable housing. And when I say affordable housing, I don't just mean, 60% of AMI, area median income. I mean much higher thresholds vis-a-vis area median income, to include what was referenced earlier, HDFC, similar to Mitchell-Lama programs, which are basically ways to get people home ownership and increase that. We've lost a lot of those tools for this next generation. So what was a path into stability and perhaps even a middle class lifestyle for so many families at the turn of the century and the mid-century is largely missing from this moment. We need to restore a lot of these and reinforce a lot of these housing programs so that we continue to create ways of people to find their way into the middle class. And the other thing I would say is it's largely been driven by race. I mean, if you look at Levittown, I'm an urban planner, one of the great examples of creating middle income America was largely, it was entirely race driven. It was a white suburban environment where the government subsidized middle class lifestyle and left everyone else out. And I think that is why in this next decade of work in New York City and predominantly Manhattan, we need to not only use all of the housing tools in the tool shed, but we also need to focus very much on systemic racism and how so many communities have been left out of opportunity. That not only includes to affordable housing, supportive housing, senior housing, but also home ownership, because home ownership is the way that you transition from one generation to the next in terms of opportunity. I also don't want to ever end a meeting without mentioning NYCHA. It's part of the puzzle as well. Our government failed to support us to the tune of $40 billion. Of course, if you leave housing stock out there and you don't support it, it's going to fall apart. And we need to have a government and leaders who hold every level of government accountable for doing that kind of misdeed. And I'm going to be focusing every housing tool in the tool shed to increasing housing stability, home ownership, and being a real advocate for whatever place I need to take the argument about NYCHA, about next generation of Mitchell-Lama, about increasing programs around rent stabilization and rent control, looking what the next generation of that is in a city that is going to be coming out of a very severe crisis. It's probably of the utmost, aside from climate crisis, housing, and particularly how it's been co-mingled with systemic racism, are the top of my priorities.
Thank you. We move now to Councilman Cowles. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you to the West Harlem Progressive Democrats, President Lois Penny, our moderator today, Sean Farrow. We're facing multiple crises. We have a pandemic, mass unemployment, a climate emergency, and an overdue reckoning with racial, criminal, and economic justice. We are at a precipice, and we have an opportunity today to work together to take back this city for all of us. I'm Councilmember Ben Kalos. I grew up here. I went to public school, graduated from the Bronx High School of Science. This is the sanctuary city that welcomed my grandparents and my wife when they fled anti-Semitism. Now, I rent a 1-bedroom with my wife, my daughter, who you'll overhear. You all know Pandora by now, and this is now my office too. And when I ran for office, I wanted to do something that no one else would do, and that was refusing big money from real estate, corporations, and lobbyists. And that freed me. And I was able to rezone to stop super talls and billionaires row from taking over our borough. I was able to go after bad landlords who had been getting billions in tax breaks for supposedly offering affordable housing and force them to put hundreds of thousands of units back on the markets. I was able to write the law to make the city council a full-time job so people couldn't make outside income as lawyers. I wrote the law to get rid of Lulus. And these are still things we're still trying to get done in Albany. When I couldn't get other elected officials to do the right thing when it came to developments and folks like Columbia and what have you, I authored a new campaign finance system that will allow us to elect progressive elected officials who will run the right way. And we can elect a new council and a new borough president who has always refused real estate, corporate, and lobbyist money. I want to continue Gail Brewer's legacy. We worked together to add 900 pre-K seats in my district. We secured funding for another 800 seats to be built as part of new developments in the district. We secured funding for $275 million to rebuild a resilient waterfront to protect us from climate change. We've improved commutes with bike lanes, bike share, select bus, even ferries. We put a new trash can on every corner to literally clean up the neighborhood. And since the pandemic, I've been fighting Mayor de Blasio to make sure we have enough PPE so that our Black and brown frontline workers actually have the equipment that they need. We opened 350 new hospital beds. And as we are in this holiday season, it's important to remember that on Thanksgiving, 18,000 children woke up in a shelter, 400 men woke up at the Lucerne, another 400 woke up at a hotel in my district. I founded a task force with Borough President Gail Brewer, the Eastside Task Force for Homeless Outreach and Services, aimed at welcoming the homeless into the neighborhood. That's why on the east side, these 400 men are welcome to stay as long as they want. There hasn't been any litigation, no crocodile tears from politicians. We've been doing the work, and I've even been able to build supportive housing for formerly homeless women and families across the street from where I live. Where others see a dying city because of vacant apartments, I see 10,000 vacant apartments where we can house the homeless today. And you can read more about it in an op-ed I wrote with Fred Shack at Urban Pathways. The borough president is Manhattan's fixer, and we've been taking on problems that have been around for years, even decades. I believe that we can work together and we can fix them. Please join our team at kalos.nyc. Together, we can rebuild the city for all of us.
Thank you, Councilman. I'm going to piggyback off of the last thing that you said there. You said welcoming the homeless in our neighborhoods. We understand that you have been an outspoken proponent of housing the homeless in shelters. However, in recent months, we have seen many New Yorkers in areas such as the Upper West Side be very critical of such moves. If elected as borough president, how will you balance addressing the needs to shelter some of our most vulnerable New Yorkers against those that wish not to have the de facto homeless shelters in their neighborhoods?
There is no question. You have to have the courage to come to the community and say that this is not about some idea that they may have. It's literally, we're talking about children. We're talking about families that make up 35,000 people living in shelters right now. And I think people get the moral imperative. It's about building a coalition of elected officials who are willing to actually build the supportive housing, build the shelters. And quite frankly, we have an opportunity to take all the vacant apartments in my building, anyone's building, and house the homeless. I would love to bring a homeless family or a homeless individual to be my next door neighbor. And so I think the answer that we say to the person is either you can have that person on the street or you can welcome them in on your block or even in your building. But that's the only way we're going to be able to solve this crisis, with a housing first approach. And when you do the work like we've done in our district, when we welcomed the people to the hotel in our district, there were some growing pains. But I got on the phone with all the neighbors, I got on the phone with all the institutions, and I said, we have to welcome our new neighbors. If you have a problem, call me. And inevitably there were, and we were there as elected officials to actually support them as friends and neighbors.
Thank you. I want to shift gears to policing. As a member of council, you've said that you made the mistake of supporting the addition of 1,300 police officers and an increase in the NYPD budget by $1 billion. And you said it's our responsibility to right that wrong. Aside from reallocating funds from the NYPD to other services, what policies do you think should be enacted to right that wrong?
We need to completely it was something that I opened with. We are dealing with an overdue reckoning with racial equality, economic justice, and criminal justice. We have to completely revamp our entire system, starting with the schools to prison pipeline. I've authored legislation for universal after school, for universal summer camp, and for I've sponsored legislation for universal youth jobs. We have to end the schools to prison pipeline, and we need to carry that through. We need to make sure that somebody who looks like me has the same justice system as a Black and brown person who really sees something different. I voted to close Rikers, and I stand behind that vote. And I do think that the only one here who is actually willing to put actions behind my words, and I voted to defund the NYPD in the budget. And I think that counts for a lot. And we actually need politicians who have the courage to do the hard work. And so it starts with our schools. It starts with making sure we invest in our Black and brown communities that have been harmed by over-policing. And frankly, on the precipice of legalizing marijuana, we need to make sure that that just doesn't go to make wealthy corporations and billionaires richer. We actually need to make sure that the money that comes from legalizing marijuana actually goes into Black and brown people in communities that have been harmed by the war on drugs. There's so many opportunities to do this right.
Thank you. You touched upon the school to prison pipeline there. We understand that education is vital to shutting down that pipeline. One of the issues surrounding education is the mayoral control of city schools. Do you support the mayor having control of the city schools? Why or why not? And if you do not, what alternative do you propose?
In the past, I have supported mayoral control. At this point, I agree with the United Federation of Teachers and so many others that based on how the mayor has handled the coronavirus and bring our kids back, that we need to take back some municipal control on the situation. Michael Mulgrew has proposed some great points that would be a starting point in terms of empowering the PEP, which the borough president has appointments to. And let me just talk about the things I can control. As a council member, as all of our elected officials from the assembly and the Senate down to council, we have discretionary funds. And you will often see those funds only going to certain schools in the neighborhood. If you look at my record, we've been investing in every single school, whether or not the kids live in my district. And what you will find is that schools in my district who have been getting funding from my office since the beginning, including schools that were 99.5% students of color, had the technology, had the laptops, and went home when this pandemic started with a laptop. And at this point, there are still 60,000 students who still don't have laptops. And that's why I've authored legislation to mandate laptops and internet for every single public school student. Thank you for having me. I would love to have your support. Please connect at kalos.nyc. I'd love to hear more from you.
Thank you, Councilman. Last but certainly not least, we're going to turn over the floor now to Senator Hoylman. Senator Hoylman, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean, everyone. Thanks for the great conversation. Going last means that I get to hear all of my colleagues, and they did a remarkable job, I have to say. They're very thoughtful. And thanks to West Harlem Progressive Dems and Lois, Lisa, Barry for your leadership. I'm going to tell you first a little bit about my background, second about what I've done as a state senator for the last 8 years, and third, and most importantly, about what I hope to do as your next borough president. So first, my background. I grew up in rural West Virginia. Yes, West Virginia. And as a gay kid growing up there, New York City was the dream, the place I wanted to move for so many reasons. I had a mom, a dad, 2 brothers, 3 sisters, and a house with 1 bathroom. So that was my learning process about Manhattan real estate. I had a really tough childhood, a dad who was a tyrant, abusive to my mom. But what really saved me was my mom's belief in education and teaching me that reading was the opening to a lifetime. And I really always have to remember that. And I try to instill that in my kids. Thanks to her, I won a scholarship out of West Virginia and moved to New York City, met my husband, David, in the first 6 months I was here. And we're now in the same apartment building that we were 27 years ago with 2 kids, as I said, Lucy, age 3, and Sylvia, age 10. I got involved in my local block association and then my community board, like a lot of us do. I became a district leader and I won election to the state senate back in 2012. So let me tell you a little bit about my record. I've passed 79 bills, and I'm proud to say some of them which are considered the most consequential and progressive in recent decades. I took on the issue of child sexual abuse by passing the Child Victims Act with Assemblywoman Linda Rosenthal that allows adult survivors of abuse to file claims against their abusers and also the institutions, churches, yeshivas, the Boy Scouts of America that may have protected them. I passed something called the Police Statistics and Accountability Act, which for the first time is going to require the police to share data on the demographics of the people they're arresting and ticketing. And the big news is that it actually goes into effect today. That was part of the Albany police reforms that passed this summer. I'm proud to have been an active participant in that effort. I passed the Gender Expression Non-Discrimination Act, which for the first time establishes a transgender human rights law for transgender and non-binary New Yorkers. It's hard to believe, but for decades that legislation was blocked by Republicans in Albany, and I'm proud to say we got it passed. And I took on the anti-vaxxers by strengthening vaccine requirements for our kids. This is the bill I may be most proud of, especially now during the pandemic, even though I've endured months of crazy protests and even death threats against my kids as a result. And I took the experimental COVID-19 vaccine over the summer. I signed up online and became a participant in the trial. And I was very lucky because I chose the Pfizer vaccine, and all things considered, I'm doing okay. As well as, you know, far better than, unfortunately, most of us who have, and so many of us who have suffered in this pandemic. And I was part of last year's historic rent reforms, which was a major shift in the way Albany operates to protect tenants. I even passed legislation to allow the US Congress to have access to Donald Trump's state tax returns. I hope they've taken advantage of that. So I've taken on fights against powerful interests and made some righteous enemies. But if anything, it has energized me to take on the daunting tasks ahead of us, given the COVID-19 crisis. So what I want to say is to share with you how I see this office. But suffice to say is that we have to focus on building Manhattan back. We have to fight for small businesses. We have to tackle the inequities that you've heard discussed today. I want to see a Manhattan with policies that help our small businesses pay their rent. That's why I have landmark legislation called Save Our Storefronts, and passed a proposal with the MTA that allows small businesses in Grand Central Station to pay a percentage of their revenue for their rent instead of the full megillah. I want to see Manhattan with major new public spaces and new affordable housing. I want to see a Manhattan with programs to permanently preserve and protect neighborhoods like Chinatown, Koreatown, East Harlem, Lower East Side, and other cultural enclaves. I want to see a Manhattan that's economically equitable, one that allows young people and artists to move here, and senior citizens to retire here without bankrupting themselves. And I want to see a Manhattan that is racially just. I've said this before, and it bears saying again. All of the candidates here in this forum are white, and that may just be some indication of the racial disparities that we have in our own borough. I have a record of getting big things done in Albany, and I'm going to put that energy into doing the same as Manhattan Borough President. We live in the best borough and the greatest city in the world, and we have to fight to keep it that way. Thanks so much. I'm really interested and eager to hear your questions.
Thank you, Senator. I think you touched upon a little bit here, but I'm gonna back up just a little bit and say that you were on record saying that there needs to be a Marshall Plan referring to the Great World War II initiative by America and allies to help Europe rebuild. Why does Manhattan need a Marshall Plan as to any other plan put forth by other candidates? What does that Marshall Plan entail, and how will it work to bring Manhattan back?
Thank you. Well, I think we need it because Manhattan, like really every other borough, but particularly given the small business concentration that we have, is facing this apocalypse in the small business world with the shutdowns looming and the lack of federal and state support coming. We're going to see these small businesses evaporate before our very eyes unless we do something about it. That's why by this legislation called Save Our Storefronts that we hope to pass in Albany, which would cap a small business tenant's rent at a certain percentage and asking the commercial landlord to bear some of those costs, as well as the state stepping in. We can have that shared sacrifice. But really, it's about planning, Sean, and it's about making sure that every community board has a seat at the table. I am a strong believer in 197A, community-driven programs, and I would pledge that within the first 6 months as borough president, I would invite every community board to institute one of those and use the office of the borough president to help make that happen. I call it a Marshall Plan because to me, it's like the biggest project of our lifetimes, just like the Marshall Plan was the biggest project in the lifetimes of so many previous generations. So the task before is enormous, and I think that the borough president can be a key component in helping to rebuild.
Thank you. You have about 2 minutes left, so I'm going to shift back to something you said a few minutes ago. Congratulations on the act being passed that deals with police statistics and accountability. Some people who are proponents of more police accountability and oversights believe that officers should have their pensions taken away from, or have some monetary amount taken away from their pensions if they are named in a civil suit and they are part of that losing civil suit. Do you think that if an officer is involved in a civil suit and loses it, a monetary judgment that is awarded should come out of the officer's pension plan?
Yes, in a word. I think we have to use every opportunity to try to increase police transparency and accountability. Another great idea is requiring officers, which used to be the case, to actually live within the 5 boroughs. I'm a co-sponsor, by the way, of both of those bills. I also believe that, the NYPD can't go rogue any longer. I call City Hall, they tell me one thing when there's when there's a protest in my district. NYPD tells me something differently. There's a database right now, and it was referenced earlier, that the NYPD manages, and it is not under state regulation. It is totally under the NYPD's, and young people as young as 12 or 11 years old have data from their DNA in this permanent database. I carry legislation to end that rogue database, if you will, and put it under the auspices of the state of New York. We've made a lot of progress with police accountability. Frankly, I think a new commissioner is probably necessary. That obviously is going to happen under a new mayor. But I really want to see the mayor, the police commissioner, the city council, but mostly communities in tandem with our NYPD. We can have a partnership with our local law enforcement. We just need the will to make sure that happens.
Thank you. And with that, we are done with the question and answer portion from me, the moderator. I'm now going to open up the question and answer to the audience. We have one question, and I'm going to start with Senator Hoylman. Since you went last, you'll begin this session off first. Many of the borough president's powers involve land use decision for zoning changes. The city is in an affordable housing crisis. The new affordable housing units are frequently priced higher than that residents of the neighborhood can afford. How would you as borough president use your role in the land use process to move beyond vanilla mandatory exclusionary housing affordable units?
Well,
mouthful.
mandatory inclusionary housing just isn't good enough, not in a housing crisis. So we've got to revamp that. We can't let luxury and the market lead the construction of affordable housing. That hasn't worked. We've seen just drips and drabs of affordable housing being built during this administration. They like to claim credit for units that are online decades ahead, but it's not helping our local communities. Look, we've got a solution that's sitting right before our very eyes. It's called Midtown Manhattan and 20 million square feet of empty office space. I want to repurpose that office space, working with local community boards to ensure that it's done in a sensitive way. I think that is probably one of the biggest challenges. It's sitting square in the middle of my Senate district, and I'd like to take advantage of that. To solve the housing crisis, not just for middle class New Yorkers, which is of course necessary, but lower income and supportive housing to address head on the homelessness crisis, which we witness every day when we step outside of our doors here in Manhattan.
Thank you. My next question for Councilman Kalos. With the economy being affected by the pandemic, what will you do to advance economic development, particularly when it comes to NYCHA residents? And are you aware of what is currently in place?
I think we've been hearing a lot about how we can have a corporate-led recovery. And for me, I'm pretty focused on a worker-led recovery. And so I've worked particularly closely with tenants in public housing. I actually supported tenants when the mayor tried to do NYCHA infill, while others took money from the NYCHA infill developers or supported NYCHA infill over the objections of the tenants. And anytime we've been able to secure money, I think I secured several $1 million with the city when Sandy happened for Sandy recovery in my district. The Upper East Side actually flooded, our public housing actually flooded. We were able to connect them with NYCHA and making sure that residents in my district could get jobs, but that's not good enough. And so I've been doing everything in my power to help the economic recovery, particularly for Black and brown people who have been on the front lines of this pandemic. And that's why I've asked the 74 labor unions that have endorsed me to help me bring jobs to Black and brown communities. And we actually are working with different apprenticeship programs. So folks, whether it's at-risk youth, people who are justice involved, public housing tenants, can have pathways directly into good jobs at unions. And I was also earlier spoke about some of the work around University of Jobs that we've done with Jamani Williams and increasing that number to 80,000. So there's an incredible amount to do there, and we'll continue to fight that fight.
Thank you. Representative Boylan, my next question is for you if you're still on. Maybe not. We can always come back. Moving on to Councilman Levine. Councilman Levine, what schools do, another question from the audience, they currently allocate CASA funding, Cultural After School Adventure Programming, to see if they personally allocate funding to schools that need resources. I guess the question for you is, my question to you is, what schools do they currently allocate CASA funding to?
Well, Sean, arts education in our schools is just so critical. It's something that we're failing at as a city. There are many public schools that don't have a full-time arts teacher. And to me, this is critical to the full development of young people for whom arts helps them with self-expression, with core academic performance, potentially with career opportunities. This needs to be improved during the school day, but we also need to use partnerships with nonprofits to expand programming after school. We have a wonderful initiative in the City Council called CASA, to which we're able to fund virtually every school in my district. This year, I believe 15, with after school programming delivered by local nonprofits focusing on arts, music, education. it's not enough. We have to do better. Every school must have a full-time arts teacher, and arts must be a part of the school year for every child every year from pre-K to 12th grade. So this is something I care a lot about, and something I will certainly be focusing on if I'm lucky enough to be the next Manhattan Borough President.
Thank you. Turning now to Ms. Watkins. Ms. Watkins, New York City is known for its gig economy as well as its service industry. The gig economy and service industry have been among the hardest sectors hit. What would you do as borough president to help them get back on their feet moving forward?
What a great question. I'm in the gig economy. I spent my formative business years, my career in marketing management. And after I got married, I was fired because I got married, in fact, from an executive management job. And I, became kind of succumbed to the role of being a mom and ended up in the gig economy as a fitness trainer and marathon coach for the Roadrunners Club as a part of that experience as a New Yorker who has a child at home, and where the gig economy is really vital because it allows individuals who are either getting a degree or raising a family the opportunity to make some money and generate wealth and to have self-worth as a function of part of life, not a complete career. But it's a really critical piece of our economy that needs stimulation as we come out of the pandemic. And I think one of the things I would like to see us do is really focus on pop-up shops and micro business development that helps people gain access to the funds that they need, to microloans and capitalization of concepts that will drive us into the sort of kind of the next generation of what our economic structure is going to look like. We know that we don't serve, to tie things back to schools a little bit. We know, and if you're in my generation, I'm Gen X, that we were kind of brought up to believe that if you went to school, you got a degree, and you went to college and you got a degree, there was going to be an opportunity for you to take a full-time job, and that job was going to pay better than the job that your parents paid. So you were kind of like headed on your way. And that doesn't really exist anymore. So in some ways, what we need to also foster is a concept where our public schools and our public universities are cost effective enough for us to create career opportunities and an economic landscape for people to explore their different interests and their skill set. And part of that is experimentation. So a gig economy could be a natural buffer for people coming out of school, whether it's CTE school or potentially part-time college after high school, or even in a transitional sort of perspective, sort of like what happened to me after I got married and was fired for doing so. I think I'll stop it there, but those are a couple of my ideas.
Thank you. Turning next to Ms. Caputo. There is a ton of problems affecting NYCHA and has been ongoing and has at this point become pervasive. How do we save these developments and ensure that they continue to exist as safe, affordable, and desirable places to live?
Thanks so much for your question. And I think I'm uniquely qualified to answer this question as somebody who ran a community board and who actually instituted the first NYCHA public housing task force of any community board, arguably in the city, definitely on the west side and in Manhattan. I believe very strongly in the importance of NYCHA. I have read through sort of what your club's core principles are related to infill and to private sector development. I do not support that. I support private sector getting involved to support housing generally. But when it comes to the infill, I do not support that. When it comes to working with the community and working with NYCHA, the borough president's job is to work with community boards and is to work with communities in each of them. One of the things I did as community board chair was we hosted meetings across all 12 sort of all parts of the neighborhood during the time. Each month, we had 12 meetings. I hosted each of them in a different part of the neighborhood, most of my term as chair. That to me is something that is critically important to get out and to show. We need to recruit and make sure we have people on our community boards who truly represent the community. To me, that includes NYCHA. I think when it comes to funding, we need to make absolute certain that we are working with NYCHA residents as our partners and bringing them in on the community level in a way that perhaps we have not done so. I think Gail's done a great job at it. I think we can expand it and make sure that when it comes to not only people serving on community boards who are NYCHA residents, but actually putting them in positions of leadership is critically important right now. And I would do that as borough president and make sure across our 12 community districts across Manhattan that is a priority. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome back, Representative Boylan.
Hi, sorry about that, my confusion.
No problem. You had talked about previously pushing for policies that end police violence, such as the ban on police chokeholds. If elected, what other policies would you push for that will help curb police violence?
Sure, well, I would say, and I think you touched on it a bit earlier in some of the other questions, but mental health has been a lifelong priority for me in terms of advocacy and policy. I come from multi-generational family of women who've lost custody of their kids because of mental illness and addiction. And I can tell you that my sister landed in prison after dealing with some very serious mental health issues that should have been handled very differently. And so all the things that are going on right now with interactions with the police that become that much more serious and dangerous because their mental health calls need to change entirely. I think the entire process for who are mental health first responders overall, unless there's a violent interaction and it's warranted, should not be police officers as a first issue. We also need to make public through open data information all police records and accountability about the CCRB. It shouldn't just be cases that have to be brought to light and be pushed for, transparency's laws. We don't even know the extent to which some police officers aren't even held accountable to the community, to the city, and that needs to change. And frankly, I think the head of the PBA really has done a real disservice to the good work that community-based policing can do to help the community. In fact, I think he's led with the most hateful rhetoric that really hurts very necessary community healing that needs to happen. I also think, and we referenced a little bit earlier, but it shouldn't take people announcing that the police commissioner doesn't live in the city of New York for him to move here. I think if you're high enough ranking in the police force, you should be living amongst New York City, community residents. So just to recap, transparency laws and open information in terms of, police records, people who have not been held accountable, not just a case-by-case basis through the CCRB. Mental health calls should not be routed through the police department as a first responder, only unless absolutely necessary. We should be using and developing much more through funding. Alternative response, crises response, like emergency mental health first aid, which I'm trained in, that I got through the city of New York. And in terms of residency, not just for the police commissioner, but all high-ranking police officers in the city of New York, they really should be based from the city. And one thing I have learned in several of the conversations I've had specifically in NYCHA is that in the 80s and 90s, I think mostly the 80s, there used to be community-based police resources that were stationed within NYCHA facilities. And those police officers had much stronger ties to the community than a lot of the reorganization by precinct. And I think that going back to some of those community-based outreach systems is much more advisable than some of the central changes that have been made over the last decade or so.
Thank you.
Thanks,
My-
Jewel.
My next question I'm going to ask to a couple of different candidates here. I'm going to direct this question to Councilman Kalos, as well as Senator Hoylman and Ms. Watkins. Gail Brewer worked closely with Joyce McMillan when she was the director at Child Welfare Organizing Project. What are your intentions on working with the community to prevent removals from parents for reasons we know stem from poverty, such as living in a shelter, no food, dirty clothes, etc.? I'm going to start with Councilman Kalos, since you worked with Gail Brewer closely.
So sure. When we're talking about what our children and our families are going through in our city, that's going to be one of the toughest things that we can do as an elected official. It's one of the Supreme Court cases that that touched me most in terms of the Supreme Court. So just to be clear, we have to decriminalize poverty, full stop. And we can't be in a situation where a family that doesn't have resources and where they have a slumlord who's not giving them heat gets punished for that, when we should be going after the landlord for putting children in danger. And when they don't have access to food, going after the parent instead of giving them the resources that they need. We need to fundamentally restructure ACS around how can we support our families who are trying and struggling to stay in this great city. One of the things I've been working on now, and I hope we can get done with the Biden administration, is something called automatic benefits. And what that would do is give families in poverty all the resources they need automatically, from free phone service and reduced fee internet or free internet to the food that they need. And I think that's part of what we can do. There's going to be a lot of work to do. I know that Joyce McMillan is on here, that the Mother Jones piece is moving, and I will be proud to work with you. We have a pretty strong record in my office of working with people just like Joyce and Gail and so many others. Most of the legislation I've ever put forward has a person's name on it. And it's because we work with folks to put forward legislation. And in the City Council's Progressive Caucus Chair, we're looking at reforming ACS, and would like to work with the West Harlem Progressive Democrats, Joyce McMillan, Gail Brewer, and anyone we can to really change things in the time that we have left in this City Council. And I'll keep it going as the next borough president.
Thank you. Same question to you, Ms. Watkins.
Just to echo and acknowledge Councilmember Kalos's remarks about the overall structure and system. I completely agree with him. My bird's eye view is not the same as his as a member of sort of operating member right now of current projects. But what I will say as a mother, as someone who's a leader in the public school system and who has experienced a multitude of engagements with parents across the spectrum within District 3, which is the most segregated school district in the most segregated school system in this country. We have rigged so many of these systems to support the people that already have what they need at its most basic level. Where I think we have a really significant amount of trouble is identifying the ways that the most essential needs are distributed at the ground level. And I think that we've commodified even some of these resources to such a degree that where I find I'm troubled by within the examples of ACS and our homeless crisis right now. One of the things that strikes me as really frustrating as a taxpayer is that we tend to put legislation and money behind issues where we don't necessarily understand the transparency level that is needed to make sure that the services and the money gets to the right place at the right time. I think a great deal of opaqueness has clouded the judgment of a lot of the policies and a lot of the policy makers around how we ensure that if you have children, you are able to access the resources that you need. And of course, decriminalizing, as Councilmember Kalos acknowledged, decriminalizing poverty is a really important piece of that. Where I live in Harlem, even in my own building, I live in an HDFC. I'm struck by the significant amount of disparity, this disproportionate number of people that live in the northern part of Manhattan that are truly desperate and suffering because we have rigged not just the public school system to help the most privileged, not just our home, our housing stock, and our economy. So to come full circle here, our priorities really do revolve around those three huge buckets of intersectional issues. And I'll be excited to work with Ms. McMillan and the West Harlem Democrats as we move this issue forward.
Thank you. And Senator Hoyleman, same question to you.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. It really boggles the mind that we have such a chasm between the very, very wealthy and the extreme impoverished, particularly those our children. I mean, it's heartbreaking, and credit to Joyce and to Gail. I mean, they're both going to be hard acts to follow, and I hope I can continue that partnership should I be so honored to be the next borough president. But I'll tell you this, we need to focus on revenue because we have over 100 billionaires in the city of New York, the most of any global center in the entire world. And they're not paying their fair share. They're not paying their fair share in income tax. They're not paying their fair share in real estate taxes. And so we're just leaving money on the table and unable to secure the social safety net that has made New York City what it is. I have a tax that it's called the pied-à-terre tax, although it should be called the oligarch tax, because it would tax those individuals who own second, third, and fourth homes worth $5 million or more in the city of New York. And it could generate $390 million annually, according to the Independent Budget Office. So I think the borough president, I'd like to make the borough presidency a legislative powerhouse and a partnership with the city council and the state legislature, and ensuring that we have a fair and equitable tax system to provide for those most in need. There is no excuse for us having this situation of impoverishment among our children. There's no excuse to have the wealthiest city in the world have the most desperate people, children, parents, and families in the world. So that's going to be part of my focus, as well as continuing the partnerships that have been successfully so pioneered by Gail and Joyce.
Thank you very much. And with the remaining time that we have left, I'm going to direct our last question to Ms. Caputo, Ms. Representative Boylan, and Councilman Levine in that order. And this one's a little bit different here. We have learned a lot during this pandemic. And one thing that we learned is how important internet access is. Due to a lack of affordable options, many households in New York City do not have internet access. As borough president, what would you do to guarantee that all residents have low cost, high-speed internet access without increasing the market dominance and consolidation of a handful of internet service providers? Ms. Caputo, you first.
Sure, or former Chair Caputo. I like
Former
that
Chair
too. Thanks. But yes, this is right up, you're speaking my language. This is what I work on every day in my day job at the World Economic Forum, where we are working with technology providers to try to provide technology into cities in an equitable way. And I think when it comes to the schools, which has been an issue that I have been particularly focused on in the public schools, I've been very active in the debate over opening the schools. And the reason I care so much about that is, you know, it's a lot of working moms, a lot of working people who are dealing with working from home. But to me, it's the people, the 60,000 devices that are sitting somewhere that have never been served for people, the tens of thousands of young people in shelters who have not had access to Wi-Fi during the school shutdown. So to me, one of my big advocacy points over the last few months has been really working to open the schools at this point to make sure that those kids have a chance at learning. It's going to be a lost generation of school children without those devices and without that Wi-Fi. So specifically what I would do, I have been working, as I did 7 months ago on PPE. When I went to the mayor's office and called for, had a vendor who wanted to deliver PPE in the heart of the crisis, when people were literally dying in our neighborhoods in this city, I was told it has to go through this process. You know, come back to us in 6 months. I went through Gail, who was like amazing, and we were able to deliver 200,000 units of PPE into NYCHA residences in July. And it was, to me, 3 months too late, but we got it done. In the same way, I want to be able to work with all parties, with the private sector and with the public sector, to get that done, to ensure that we have the Wi-Fi that these most vulnerable students and most vulnerable kids and people need in our city, to make sure that we are wired and we were completely ready for the 21st century. And I will take that same commitment and energy that I have done throughout my career as a community board chair into that to get it done, working in and out of government to make sure we get those things done for people. So thanks.
Thank you. Representative Boylan, what would you do if you were borough president?
So one of the agencies that I oversaw when I was Secretary for Economic Development was actually ESD, which implemented the broadband program statewide. And when I say implemented, I mean this is a several years process to get high-speed internet access to people across the state. What amazed me the most about the operational logistic challenge, and I'll get to a little bit further in a second, is there are places in the Adirondacks where kids have better high-speed internet access than in the city of New York. And that is just unbelievable when you think about it, that we can be a high-speed internet capital and so many of our children are being unserved in a place where our franchise agreements should dictate and stipulate not only access, but affordability. So it's not just an access problem, it's also an affordability problem. So one of the things that the state did when I was there was sue franchisees to ensure that every New Yorker was being given access to high-speed internet. But again, that's different than having a high-speed internet access, which is not affordable to a lot of families. So what I would fight for is not only getting past the operational issue in the city of New York, ensuring that operationally our franchise agreements, like I think Councilman Kalos is mentioning in the chat, the work I already did to make sure those agreements cover high-speed internet, but also that we have stipends and lower cost programs that actually make it affordable if costly at all. I think there should absolutely be funding, particularly for families who are already in our experiencing our social safety net system. People should have access to high-speed internet, or they're not part of our educational process. And I want to highlight here, especially while thinking through at a policy level, operationally, which I already did working for the state, affordability, making sure everyone can afford it. The 100,000 or so kids at any point in the year, which the number's only gone up, living in our shelter system. It's a true travesty that there are any shelters in the city of New York that already don't have high-speed internet access. And that is an operational problem that can be solved now. And Theo, I see your point. That was only one step about the franchisee. I'm not talking about suing everyone. I'm talking about coming to affordability plans for those who can't get access on the regularly scheduled plans, and then widening that group to ensure that people experiencing the shelter system already have access to it because of the base that we can provide to people. So it's not just through lawsuits, it's actually operationally, case management for areas of the city which are not being served well operationally, and then doing more for large groups of people, particularly students experiencing the shelter system.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least as well, Councilman Levine.
Well, thank you, Sean, and thank you for this wonderful discussion. And it's been great to be here with my friends and colleagues, Brad, Kim, Ben, Elizabeth, and Lindsay. Just a word on Joyce McMillan, who is absolutely right that we have to reform ACS. 80% of the times where we're taking kids away from their homes, it's not about a case of physical violence. It's ultimately often about neglect tied to financial problems. And it would be much easier for the city, instead of spending $50,000 a year for foster care, to help with financial support so those families can stabilize and create a healthier environment. So thank you again, Joyce, for your leadership on that. And as for internet access, an important topic to close us out on, Sean, the current statistic is that 40% of New Yorkers do not have internet both at home and or by mobile, and that 18% have access in neither venue. That clearly is a barrier for economic advancement, for educational advancement, for so much that we need for modern life. And my goodness, the failure of the DOE to ensure that kids who are distance learning have access is just reprehensible, with 60,000 or more kids today at this late date, 10 months into the pandemic, who don't have an internet connected device, and 10 or more shelters where homeless families are living with no adequate Wi-Fi there. They've been reduced to giving paper handouts to some of these kids. It's just reprehensible. We have to fix this. And we do have some power here because of the franchise agreements that all of these big internet service providers need from us. And so let's stipulate that they have to ensure high-speed access for every single home in their service area, and that they have to offer free and low-cost plans to families who need it, so that we do truly have universal broadband internet access. Long overdue, but we certainly need it now more than ever. Thank you again, Sean, and to everyone for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Councilman. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you for joining the West Harlem Progressive Democratic Club and our Borough President Forum. Thank you to former Manhattan Community Board 7 Chair Elizabeth Caputo, President Community Education Council 3 Kimberly Watkins, Councilman Mark Levine, Representative Lindsay Boylan, Councilman Ben Kalos, and Senator Brad Williamson. Thank you all for joining. I wish you all best of luck in your races moving forward, and we look forward to hearing more on your issues. Thank you, thank you, thank you again. Wish everybody to be safe and well during the holidays, and we will see you in the new year. Thank you.
Happy holidays.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
Happy
Sean.
holidays,
Bye,
everybody.
everybody.
Bye. See everyone
Bye.
soon on another Zoom.
Happy Hanukkah.
See
Absolutely.
you guys. Happy
Thank you.
holidays.
Happy holiday.
Good to see you, Lois. Thank you.
Okay, we're done. Wait a minute. Okay. How do I close it? Okay, how do I close out? In.